Lots of players are making this game a lot harder on themselves than it needs to be because they get these 10 important rules wrong. Hi, I'm Jeremy with Elevation Games. Have you picked up Arkham recently and you're struggling to beat even the first scenario? Well, it could be because you're misinterpreting these 10 important rules that a lot of new players get wrong when they first start out. The game is hard, don't get me wrong, it has that reputation for a reason, but a lot of people make it even harder than it needs to be because these rules are really, really easy to read and just get them even a little bit wrong that can crank the difficulty on the game way up. The first rule a lot of new players get wrong involves doom. Now, as you know, you're constantly fighting against the clock in Arkham Horror. The clock in the form of doom that's accumulating on the monster's agenda deck. Every turn, you're adding more doom to that deck, directly or through cards that are in play, and when you reach a certain threshold, your enemy's plans and that agenda deck advance. What a lot of new players miss is that doom leaves play entirely when the agenda deck advances. So you can actually use this to your advantage. Doom is largely getting put out in play during player's turn. So if you know, for instance, that you're going to trigger that advancement on the agenda deck when you get back around to it in the Mythos phase, you might as well go ahead and do tons of stuff that puts lots of doom out on the board, and then you don't have to worry about it, because once that agenda deck advances, all that doom is going to go away. Typically even doom that's in play, not on the deck itself. Now there are exceptions to this, of course, and that's important to note for all of these rules. There are exceptions to almost every one of them. Specific cards, different rules can come into play depending on the scenario, expansion, mythos pack you're playing, but 80-90% of the time these rules are going to be correct, and they might end up making things a little bit easier on you. The second thing people tend to get wrong is regarding the hunter keyword on enemies. So you can end up with a lot of enemies out on the board while you're playing, but the only enemies that actually move during the enemy phase have the hunter keyword. The other enemies, regardless of how nasty and dangerous they may appear, they're basically going to stay right where they are, unless they engage with an investigator and move with that investigator. The only ones you have to worry about actually moving from location to location and hunting you are, appropriately, the enemies tagged with the hunter keyword. Which sort of brings me to my next rule that a lot of people get wrong. Hunters also often come with a prey, a preferred prey that they want to go after. This could be the person with the lowest intellect or the highest strength. You never know, it could be anything. But that effect only triggers when there are two equally valid targets. What do I mean by equally valid targets? Well, the monster is always going to move toward the closest investigator. That is almost universally true. Again, there may be a few little exceptions here and there, but for this one, there aren't that many, honestly. And that overrides the prey effect. So, regardless of whose preferred prey is listed on the card, the monster is going to go toward whoever is closest. The prey effect comes into play when there are two investigators, either of whom the monster could reach, both of whom are equally distant from the monster. So the monster may need to move a couple of spaces to get to either one of them. In that case, it will check its prey, and that will be the tiebreaker. The next rule that people tend to get wrong is your skill value cannot go below 0. So there's lots of things in this game that can reduce your skill value for a variety of reasons. When you're performing a skill check, all sorts of things can subtract from whatever your base skill is and knock it down, but it can never go into the negative. So what that means, a couple of things. One, whatever you're testing against, 0 is as low as you'll ever get. And 2, if you reduce the difficulty of a skill check to 0, you will automatically pass it almost every time. Because in the instance of a tie, the investigator passes. So, for instance, if you use a flashlight to reduce the shroud on a particular location to 0, you're practically guaranteed that no matter what your investigator draws out of the Mythos bag, they're going to pass that test, because their skill value will only ever go down to 0, which is a tie. We spoke about the agenda a little bit earlier. You're only going to actually advance the agenda once all the players have taken their turn, the monsters have taken their turns, everyone has refreshed, everything has to happen, has to go all the way back around till you're back up to the Mythos phase. At that point, you check the current agenda and see if it advances. So here again, if you know that the agenda is going to get triggered when you get back around to the Mythos phase, this could be an opportunity for you to burn a bunch of cards, use a bunch of skills, get rid of some enemies that would normally add more doom to the agenda, and it's fine to do it. It's not going to matter because, again, all of that doom is going to go away and you're going to get a fresh slate when you start at the top of the next round. If you've started building decks at all at this point, at some point you may realize that some of the cards have a permanent keyword on them. Permanent abilities are unique. They don't actually go into your deck. When you purchase a permanent card, it acts, just as it says, as a permanent ability. It's something that gets added and you sit it out next to your player when you're playing, and that's just something that they have constantly. You don't have to draw it. You start with it out face up every time you start a new game, and it just sits there, giving you whatever bonus it provides. It also doesn't count against your max deck limit, because again, it's not going in the deck. It's just a permanent ability that you get to sit out and have constantly boosting your character. This makes permanent cards pretty powerful. They also can tend to be fairly expensive in the experience points you need to spend to buy them. But they can certainly be worth it because, again, these are permanent upgrades that are just going to give your characters a flat bonus that they're always going to get, and they're not going to count against that deck limit. Speaking of your investigator deck, have you ever drawn your first hand to start a game and been disappointed? Well, there's a way around this. You're actually allowed to take a mulligan on that first draw. So if you draw your first hand and you don't like it for whatever reason, you can pick cards. You actually don't have to put the entire thing back and draw it again. You can pick which cards that you don't want, shuffle them back in, and draw that number of cards again. You're still limited to that first number of cards that you're allowed to draw, but you can actually be very selective about which cards you want to keep and which you want to draw a second time. Now, once you do the second draw, you're not allowed to keep doing this. You only get one shot there, but it can help you get a much stronger starting hand. Players can go in any order when they are taking their turns. So this can give you a fairly significant advantage. You don't have to actually go around the table clockwise or counterclockwise like you do with a lot of games, and you don't have to keep the same order every turn. So if you need, as the Seeker, need to wait a second and let the Guardian, for instance, go into a location and deal with some monsters before you go in there and try to get clues, you can totally do that. And next turn, maybe you as the Seeker need to go first, and the Guardian needs to wait a minute and go second. You can go in any order you want. It's important to strategize and figure out, okay, what advantages can we get by a certain person using specific skills before I get to go. That's a very important part of being successful at this game, is communicating with the other players and making sure you have a coordinated strategy. So we talked about how monsters move or don't move, and what their preferred prey can be. One thing a lot of new players miss, though, is that monsters actually exhaust after they attack. So if you do end up in a worst case scenario where you are getting attacked by a monster, it actually gives you a little bit of breathing room. Once you take that hit, the monster will exhaust. When drawing cards from the Mythos deck, some of them, you may have noticed, will have the Peril keyword on them. This means that you are actually not allowed to be helped by other investigators. In fact, you're not even supposed to tell them what you've drawn. It's supposed to be kept completely secret to yourself. You can, of course, ask questions if you need to about specific rules or something like that, but you are basically only allowed to deal with this yourself. So any powers or cards that need to be played, any boost to your skill, you can do that yourself, but you're not allowed to have other players pitching in either skill points or specific abilities to help you deal with that peril. So there you have it. 10 rules that lots of new players tend to get wrong. I got them wrong myself. I should say this is something that we have done. Every mistake I've listed here, I have made at some point during our time playing Arkham Horror. Some of them I still do from time to time. It's hard to remember all of these. Which is why a player aid can be helpful. And in fact, if you go over to our website and follow the link that I'm putting in the comments, you can download a PDF player aid that we put together with some common keywords and some other rules clarifications that might help on some of this stuff when you're playing in the future. The important thing is just to be patient. Eventually this stuff will get internalized. It'll make more sense as you go along. But it is nice to know some of these, as a lot of these, again, are things that new players do that actually end up cranking the difficulty on the game way higher than it needs to be. And it means some people get frustrated and quit before they even get out of the core set, because they're doing things that they just don't have to do. That the not removing Doom when the agenda advances is a really big one. That trips up a lot of new players, and it makes the game exponentially more difficult, as you can imagine. So just making sure that you get that rule right can make the game significantly easier. So if you like this, be sure to like and subscribe. We've got lots more content like this coming out, and we'll see you later. Thanks, folks.